coins and notes will account for just 7% of all in-store purchases by 2024. Let's get the view of Mal Fletcher, who has, I think, got the most amazing title in the world. He is a futurist, and apparently he tracks social shifts and trends. Good morning, Mal.
Good morning, Deal.
That is one amazing title, and, it's one that I'm seriously jealous of. So what do you think about a cashless society overall? Is it a good thing?
Well, there's no question we're moving in that direction. By the way, in 2016, the estimated number of payments in the UK in stores that were with cash, was just 34%. So we are accelerating, and it hasn't been very useful for us during COVID-19 season. But there are, I think, great challenges if we went completely cashless. For example, for the elderly, they often have problems with numeracy related to mental decline. They find it much easier to deal with money they can see and feel. And then we've got poorer people lose out. 1.5 million people in the UK still have no bank account at all. And many poorer people who do have a bank account don't have access to the internet. So where do the tech have-nots go for their money? So we're not advocating here that we forget cashless systems, just that we accommodate both in a pretty healthy economy that's fair to everybody.
So there are pros and cons then in terms of this shift in that direction.
Yeah, there are. I mean, and it's not just the poor and the elderly. Every one of us would be affected in not necessarily positive ways. What about the problem of ID theft? In 2018 in the UK, just under 200,000 cases of ID fraud were reported in the UK. Now, a thief can steal my cash without getting any access to my personal info. But that's not true of most forms of digital payment. And I think the even bigger question is what comes next. China's pushing hard to become one of the first countries in the world to go completely cashless. Its number one payments app aims to use things like fingerprints, facial recognition, and other forms of biometric information, including the way we smile, to identify us when we go to make transactions or to withdraw money. Now, that might sound all very cool and sci-fi, but it leaves the door wide open, I think, for invasive governments and some businesses to misuse this very personal data related to our bodies.
So there are genuine concerns about, some of the potential things that may follow from moving in this direction. What do you think is driving us in that direction? What do you think? I mean, obviously the pandemic seems to have accelerated, but what's the driver for society, for business in moving in that direction?
Well, it's just so convenient, first of all, for the consumer, to wave a card at something. What I'm conscious of, too, is digital debt, which is on the rise in our country and across Europe today, because we're not taking the same time to think about what we're purchasing. We just quickly wave a card. We don't even have to pull cash out of a bag or even these days, interact with a PIN machine so much. So we're encouraging people almost to spend more with less forethought, and that works really well for the merchant or the bank in particular, but not so good for the consumer. So there's lots of advantages, but there are some very big disadvantages which aren't often addressed, I think.
Now, you've mentioned a few concerns that people may have. Can you understand people who may, for whatever reason, refuse to embrace digital payments?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually interesting that in Sweden today, where the government wants to go cashless by 2025, a fairly high percentage of people want access to cash to become a basic human right, because they see, the challenges I've outlined and others. One of the other challenges is criminality. Cashlessness is already breeding a range of crimes that are very easy to commit but very difficult to investigate, like hacking or what we call phishing, which is where targets, that means you and I, are contacted by email or phone or text, and we're enticed into providing sensitive data like banking and credit card details. And the important thing about that is that cyber criminals often steal quite small amounts digitally from many accounts at once. So they come away with a huge reward, knowing that there's almost zero chance that their crimes are going to be investigated, much less solved.
Now, what if I know that many people, particularly younger people, use their phones now to pay in a lot of places. But what if the phone conks out? What if the battery dies? What if somebody nicks their phone? That's it. It's gone kaput. Their whole life is gone, isn't it, in many ways?
Well, it seems like it these days, doesn't it? I mean, that is a big problem, actually, Deal, because data breaches happen. Whenever you make a cashless payment, information about you becomes available to the business in question. Not only data about the purchase, but also your account number, maybe your phone and address details and more. And there's the problem of data outages, which is what you touched on there. In 2020, in March, 4 of our biggest phone service providers in the UK went down for 5 hours. So millions of people couldn't access their bank accounts or their money in that time. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, that's a serious thing, isn't it? 5 hours may not seem like much, but if, let's say, for instance, you've got to go and buy, I don't know, baby food or nappies or something like that, and suddenly for 5 hours you can't do that, that's a serious issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of becomes very inconvenient and disrupts so many people's lives these days. So, again, I'm not advocating we try to wind back the proverbial clock. I'm a futurist, but I think we have to be wise about it and say that not all change is necessarily good change. Not all progress is good progress. We need to accommodate both cashless and cash, as I said, in a healthy economy that's fair to everybody.
Now, how do we make sure that we get the right sort of protections in place so that business gets to do what it wants to do, but we're also protected as well?
Well, that's a big question, Deal. I think part of it comes down just to personal choice. I mean, I've long advocated with people I've spoken to at events around the world that it's a good idea to carry cash in your pocket or in your bag and use it from time to time, even if you favour cashlessness, because the process of using cash means that cash is still in circulation and you're essentially sort of making a personal statement that I don't want to be in a world without this sort of hard currency. I think also we have to hold banks and other institutions accountable. Cashless is so much easier for banks, and they're among the prime movers behind the move to cashlessness. And it cuts down their need for branches, it cuts down their need for paper and all the rest of it. But for the consumer, as we've seen, it's not necessarily such good news. So we need to hold them accountable for how quickly we allow them to move us towards a full cashless system.
Now, this acceleration that's happened because of the pandemic for safety reasons, has that been a good thing? Would it have been better if we'd gone at the pace we were going at before the pandemic? Would that have allowed a lot more protections, a lot more safety measures to be put in place?
Well, we've done a lot of research at 2030 Plus, which is a think tank that I lead, and we've done it on the basis of what's happened in the COVID season to things like education and employment long term. And we found that in many cases, what COVID has done is truncate, as you suggest, what would have been long processes anyway, but still would have occurred over a longer period of time. So with education, there have been changes that would have happened towards blended online, offline education. There have been unemployment, the need to retrain more quickly because of automation, but it's been truncated or compressed by the COVID season. And the same is true with cashlessness. However, the disadvantage of that is that we're not giving the time we need to actually think about the long-term implications of present-day decisions. What does it mean for future generations that if we were to abandon cash altogether? What takes its place? Bitcoin is popular with many younger people now, but it's used less by consumers than it is by speculators and investors for good reason.
And there are loads of dangers associated with that, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, the unanimity it offers in most cases also makes it very attractive to purveyors of services and products on the so-called dark web, where you can, if you know where to look, find everything from hard pornography to human slavery for sale. I mean, I'm not saying everybody that uses Bitcoin is going in that direction. They're clearly not. But it's not regulated. It's not tied to any hard currency. Its value fluctuates according to the whims of the market. So we need to be just a little more slow and deliberate in our decision-making here.
Thank you very much for your thoughts on that. That's Mal Fletcher, beg your pardon, who's a futurist